I woke up to a 6-foot trench around my ranch, and the HOA called it progress. I went to bed owning every inch of my ranch. Before sunrise, I woke to diesel engines, floodlights, and a 6-foot trench wrapping around my home. The HOA president smiled and called it an authorized improvement. Funny thing was, nobody had asked me, and my deed said they had no right to touch my land. What they didn't know was that hidden cameras had been watching long before the first bulldozer arrived. Those recordings would uncover a plan far bigger than a trench, and by the time the truth reached a courtroom, someone was going to wish those machines had never started. Stay with me, because this only gets more unbelievable from here. And if you enjoy stories where ordinary landowners stand their ground with patience, solid evidence, and the law on their side, take a second to subscribe. There are plenty more HOA stories ahead, and I think you'll want to see how each one unfolds. I woke up at 5:08 that morning because the windows were vibrating. At first, I thought it was thunder rolling across the foothills. Wyoming storms have a way of sneaking in before sunrise, shaking the glass before the rain ever shows itself. But this wasn't thunder. It came in steady pulses, deep, metallic, deliberate. Heavy diesel engines. Banjo was already standing at the bedroom window. The old black Labrador never barked without a reason. His ears were locked forward, his body rigid, a low growl rumbling through his chest, as though he already understood something I didn't. I pulled on my jeans, shoved my feet into my boots without bothering with socks, and stepped onto the front porch. Everything inside me froze. Fresh earth stretched across my western pasture like an open wound. A trench, not a ditch, not a shallow drainage cut. A trench nearly 6 feet deep carved through my ranch, running from the north fence toward the south, stopping only a few yards short of completely surrounding my house. Beyond it, 2 bulldozers idled beside a pair of excavators while dump trucks waited in line. Their headlights cut through the dawn, reflecting off clouds of dust hanging over the pasture. Then I saw her. Standing comfortably beside the machines was Diane Prescott. She wore spotless tan boots that had clearly never touched ranch dirt before that morning, a bright orange safety vest over a pressed jacket, and sunglasses despite the sun not yet breaking the horizon. She looked less like someone supervising construction and more like someone attending a ribbon-cutting ceremony. When she spotted me, she smiled. "Morning, Nathan." She actually waved. I walked toward the fence without taking my eyes off the trench. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" She didn't hesitate. "Authorized drainage improvements." She lifted a laminated folder. Cedar Ridge Estates received approval for infrastructure stabilization. Everything you're seeing falls within our updated development boundary. I looked from the folder to the bulldozers, then to the trench, then back to her. "My property line hasn't moved. The county records disagree. My deed doesn't." Her smile stayed exactly where it was. "I'm afraid the survey was updated." Behind her, another excavator lowered its bucket into the ground. Steel teeth bit into soil that my father and I had cleared nearly 30 years ago. The sound scraped across my nerves. I climbed onto the fence rail for a better view. The trench didn't stop where I expected. It curved. They weren't simply digging along the subdivision boundary. They were wrapping around my ranch house. I followed the cut with my eyes until my stomach tightened. My gravel driveway, the only road leading in and out of my property, was almost completely isolated. One more section, maybe 30 yards. If they finished that final stretch, every vehicle would be trapped inside except by crossing fresh excavation. I looked back at Diane. "You planned this. We planned drainage. You planned to box me in." She shrugged with practiced calm. "If temporary inconvenience encourages productive negotiations, that's simply an unfortunate side effect." Those words hit harder than the engines. Temporary inconvenience. That was what she called cutting off a working ranch. Banjo stepped beside me, growling louder. Several equipment operators glanced in my direction, but kept working. None of them looked comfortable. One younger man sitting inside an excavator avoided eye contact altogether. Diane noticed. "You still have time to reconsider our purchase offer." I turned it down. "You turned down the old offer." She slid another envelope across the hood of a parked pickup truck. "This one is significantly higher. I don't care if you doubled it." She sighed as though I were being unreasonable. "Nathan, progress reaches everyone eventually." I looked across my pasture. Every fence post, every water line, every cottonwood my father planted, every inch carried memories money couldn't replace. "You built your neighborhood on your land." I pointed behind me. "This stays mine." For the first time, her smile faded. Only slightly. "But enough." She tucked the envelope back into her folder. "I hope you don't regret that decision." Without another word, she turned and signaled one of the bulldozer operators. The machine lurched forward. Fresh dirt rolled into another growing pile. The trench became longer, closer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. No yelling, no threats. I started recording. Every machine, every license plate, every worker, every foot of trench. If they believed this was legal, they wouldn't mind being documented. One operator noticed my camera and immediately looked away. Interesting. Very interesting. As the recording continued, one question refused to leave my mind. Why would an upscale suburban HOA risk lawsuits, forged paperwork, heavy equipment, and what looked dangerously close to unlawful confinement, just to force one stubborn ranch owner off 12 acres of Wyoming dirt? The answer didn't begin with bulldozers. It began 4 years earlier, the day Cedar Ridge Estates first appeared beyond my western fence. Before that, my western boundary was nothing but open grazing land. Antelope wandered through every spring, mule deer crossed the creek at dusk, and the loudest thing I'd hear most mornings was the old windmill complaining as it pumped water into the stock tank. Then the survey stakes showed up. Within weeks, graders flattened hundreds of acres beyond my fence. Trucks rolled in before sunrise. Concrete mixers replaced cattle trailers. Every month, another row of identical houses climbed out of the Wyoming dirt. People called it progress. To me, it looked like a neighborhood built too fast by people who'd never fixed a fence in 30-mile-an-hour wind. I stayed on my side. They stayed on theirs. That worked for exactly 6 months. The first letter arrived in a thick white envelope with a gold Cedar Ridge logo pressed into the corner. Inside was a purchase offer. Professional, friendly, generous. The letter described my ranch as the final parcel needed to complete the community's long-term vision. It offered nearly twice what neighboring ranch land had recently sold for. Most people would have called immediately. I folded the letter in half, walked outside, and tossed it into the burn barrel beside my workshop. The paper curled into black ash before dinner. 2 weeks later, another envelope appeared. This one wasn't mailed. Someone had slipped it inside my screen door. The number was even larger. A handwritten note rested beneath it. "We'd love to welcome you into the future." I laughed. The future apparently couldn't happen without 12 acres of stubborn Wyoming dirt. 3 days later, I met Diane Prescott for the first time. She drove onto my property in a spotless white SUV that looked completely out of place beside my dusty pickup. She stepped out, smiling before I even reached the gate. "Mr. Cole? That's me. I'm Diane Prescott, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association." She offered her hand. I nodded politely but kept mine at my side. "I assume this is about the letters." "It is." She looked past me toward the barn, the equipment shed, and the creek running behind the cottonwoods. "You have beautiful property. I know, I'd hate to see it become isolated. The word stuck with me. Not surrounded, not neighboring, isolated. She caught herself immediately. I only mean that development is moving this direction. I've noticed. We're prepared to offer well above market value. I've already answered. You never actually replied. I burned the letters. For the first time, her polished smile tightened. You didn't even consider them? I've considered this ranch every day since my father handed me the keys to the tractor. She glanced toward the fields again. You understand we're building something extraordinary. My father already did. Silence settled between us. Finally, she reached into her portfolio and handed me a business card. If you change your mind, I won't. She climbed back into her SUV without another word. But before driving away, she stopped beside my mailbox. She stared across the ranch for several long seconds, not admiring it, measuring it, planning something. I couldn't explain why that bothered me. At the time, I figured she simply wasn't used to hearing no. Looking back, that conversation wasn't a failed negotiation. It was reconnaissance. The strange things started less than 2 weeks later. The first drone appeared while I was repairing a section of fence near the western pasture. It hovered low enough for me to hear the camera stabilizer adjusting. When I looked directly at it, the drone didn't leave. It circled once, paused over my equipment shed, then drifted toward the barn before disappearing over Cedar Ridge. 3 days later, another one came. Then another, always during working hours, always photographing something different. The fourth time I saw one, I noticed a white pickup parked outside the subdivision entrance. 2 men wearing survey vests stood beside it studying maps. One of them pointed directly toward my ranch. The younger man shifted uneasily. Even from that distance, I could tell he wasn't comfortable. I didn't know his name yet. Lucas Bennett. I also didn't know he would become the first crack in Diane Prescott's entire operation. What I did know was that nobody spends that much time studying land they don't intend to touch. The next Monday, I found the first orange survey flag. It stood almost 10 feet inside my western pasture. I walked straight to it, pulled it from the ground, and carried it back across the fence. I pushed it into the dirt on Cedar Ridge's side where it actually belonged. By noon, someone had moved it back. The following morning, there were 3 flags. By Friday, there were 12. Every one of them sat a little farther inside my property than the last. They weren't making a mistake. They were testing how much ground they could claim without anyone stopping them. I started photographing every flag before removing it. Date, time, GPS location. I created a folder on my computer labeled Boundary Log. If this ever reached court, I wanted facts, not opinions. 2 days later, I heard tires crunching along my access road. A white county-marked pickup stopped beside the fence. 3 surveyors climbed out. The older man introduced himself as Mark Collins. He barely glanced at me. We're confirming subdivision boundaries. You're standing on my ranch. He checked his clipboard. Our maps indicate otherwise. My deed doesn't. He smiled politely, but it never reached his eyes. Maps get updated. Property deeds don't. One of the younger surveyors shifted uncomfortably behind him. Tall, thin, couldn't have been older than 25. His badge read Lucas Bennett. While Mark argued about easements and revised plats, Lucas kept looking at the cast-iron property marker driven into the ground decades earlier. It was still exactly where the county had placed it. Finally, Lucas spoke quietly. Mark, that's an original monument. Mark cut him off. We're following revised documentation. Lucas frowned. But shouldn't we verify? I said we're following the file. That told me everything. Not because of what Mark said, because of what he refused to say. They packed their equipment 30 minutes later. As Lucas climbed into the truck, he looked back toward me. Just for a second. Then he tapped 2 fingers against his clipboard. A tiny gesture, almost invisible, like he wanted me to pay attention. That evening, another surprise waited. At exactly 7 o'clock, powerful LED floodlights mounted on Cedar Ridge's newest homes switched on. Every beam pointed west, toward my ranch. Not their own backyards. Mine. The lights washed across my barn, equipment shed, and bedroom windows until midnight. I closed the curtains. The next night, they did it again. Banjo refused to settle. Neither did I. By the end of the week, another problem arrived. A county deputy pulled into my driveway. Deputy Eli Harper. Young, professional, trying hard to stay neutral. "We've received a complaint," he said. "About what?" "Unsafe fencing near the subdivision." I stared at him. "My fence has been here 28 years. "I understand." He walked the boundary with me. When we reached the cast-iron property monument, he knelt beside it. "This looks original." "It is." Before he could ask another question, Diane Prescott's SUV rolled up behind us. She stepped out carrying a thick binder. "Deputy Harper?" She smiled as though they were old friends. "I brought the updated survey package." She handed him professionally printed maps covered in fresh county-style seals. Harper studied them, then looked at my fence, then back at the paperwork. "I'm not qualified to resolve boundary disputes on site." "There isn't a dispute," I said. "They're standing on my ranch." Diane answered before he could. "We're simply preparing future infrastructure based on revised county filings." Harper sighed. "This appears to be a civil property matter." Civil. That single word handed Diane exactly what she wanted. Time. The deputy left after documenting both sides. No citations, no enforcement, no resolution. As Diane returned to her SUV, she smiled across the fence. "Things are changing, Nathan. Not my deed." "We'll see." She drove away. That afternoon, I ordered 8 additional hidden trail cameras. Not because I expected someone to steal cattle, because I had the growing feeling someone was trying to steal something much bigger. Over the next week, I installed cameras everywhere. Inside birdhouses, along fence posts, above the equipment shed, near the creek crossing, even inside an old owl box overlooking the western pasture. Every camera backed up automatically to a hard drive inside my workshop. If someone crossed onto my land, I'd know. 3 nights later, while reviewing one of the first recordings, I saw something that made me pause. Just after 2 a.m., 2 figures crossed through my western pasture carrying metal stakes. One of them stopped directly beside the original property monument. The other reached into a toolbox. They weren't measuring. They were digging. I replayed the footage 3 times. The timestamp read 2:07 a.m. One man held a flashlight low, while the other knelt beside the original cast-iron property monument. A shovel scraped against the soil for less than a minute before they lifted something heavy out of the ground. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. I watched one of them carry away the original survey marker. A few seconds later, he drove a new metal stake into the ground, nearly 8 feet farther inside my ranch. Then they covered the fresh dirt with the heel of a boot and walked away. They hadn't adjusted the boundary. They had manufactured one. I paused the video and zoomed in. The older man was unmistakably Mark Collins. The second figure kept his hood pulled low. Still, his posture bothered me. He seemed hesitant. Twice he looked over his shoulder toward my house before following Mark back toward the subdivision. The next morning, I drove straight to the county recorder's office. I requested the most recent survey filed against my parcel. The clerk frowned after searching for several minutes. Nothing has been recorded in the last 11 years. I leaned forward. So no revised boundary. She shook her head. Not with this office. That answer stayed with me all the way home. If no revised survey existed, then whatever paperwork Diane kept showing people had come from somewhere else, or someone else. When I reached the ranch, an envelope rested inside my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single flash drive. Nothing else. No note. No fingerprints that I could see. I carried it into my workshop without plugging it into my computer. Instead, I used an old laptop that never connected to the internet. The drive contained only 3 files. The first was a scanned engineering drawing labeled Cedar Ridge Estates, Phase 3, Expansion. My pulse slowed. I zoomed in. Roads, walking trails, retention ponds, future home lots. Everything looked ordinary until my eyes reached the western edge. My ranch wasn't shown as a neighboring property. It was colored the same pale yellow as the subdivision. My barn sat where a neighborhood park was planned. My equipment shed had become a picnic pavilion. Even my house had been replaced with the words, Future Community Recreation Area. I stared at the screen. Someone hadn't merely imagined buying my land. They had already designed the neighborhood as if they owned it. The second file was worse. It was an internal planning memo. Most of it dealt with construction schedules, utility easements, and contractor deadlines. Then one paragraph stopped me cold. Acquisition Strategy, Parcel NC-12. Below it were 4 bullet points. Increase purchase pressure. Establish revised boundary narrative. Accelerate infrastructure adjacency. Proceed with Phase 1 if voluntary acquisition fails. There was no signature, only the initials. D. P. I didn't need anyone to explain those. The third file contained photographs. One showed survey crews standing beside my western fence. Another captured stacks of replacement boundary markers lying in the back of a work truck. The final image froze me. It showed Mark Collins standing beside a pickup with the engineering plans spread across the tailgate. Across from him stood Lucas Bennett. Unlike Mark, Lucas wasn't smiling. He looked sick, as if he already knew what they were planning. A notification interrupted my thoughts. New email, unknown sender. The message contained only one sentence. They're going to isolate the ranch before they try to take it. Save everything. No name, no signature, but somehow I knew exactly who had sent it. Lucas. He hadn't said a word during our conversations. He hadn't openly challenged Diane. He hadn't refused the work. Instead, he'd started leaving a trail. First the warning beside the fence. Now this. Someone inside Cedar Ridge wanted the truth to survive. I copied every file onto 3 separate hard drives. One stayed hidden inside my gun safe. One went into a waterproof lockbox beneath my workshop floor. The third I sealed inside an envelope addressed to my attorney with instructions not to open it unless something happened to me. Then I returned to the camera footage. Frame by frame, minute by minute. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Survey crews weren't just replacing markers. They were crossing my pasture after midnight, photographing my well, measuring my driveway, marking fence corners. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. The fake boundary wasn't the goal. It was preparation. Preparation for something much bigger than... Just before midnight on the final recording, I heard Mark laugh. The microphone barely caught it. So when Phase 1 starts, another worker asked, "He'll finally get the message?" Mark answered without hesitation. He won't have a choice. At that moment, I finally understood what Diane meant when she smiled and talked about my ranch becoming isolated. The memory hit me just as another bulldozer slammed its blade into the ground outside my kitchen window. I was back in the present. The engines hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd moved closer. I grabbed my deed folder from the fireproof safe, tucked my phone into my shirt pocket, and walked back toward the trench. The cut was deeper now. Fresh piles of dirt blocked the old cattle crossing my father had built decades earlier. One excavator was working toward my driveway, while another widened the trench near the well road. They weren't improving drainage. They were removing access. Diane spotted me before I reached the fence. "I thought you'd be packing. I thought you'd be reading property deeds." She held up the same laminated survey packet. "We've already established the revised boundary." "No," I replied. "You've repeated it." She ignored the comment and motioned toward the equipment. "The sooner this phase is complete, the sooner everyone can move forward. Everyone except the man you're trapping." Her expression barely changed. "You're exaggerating." I pointed toward the driveway. A dump truck had been parked sideways across the only practical entrance to the ranch. Behind it sat pallets of concrete drainage pipe. Nothing could drive in. Nothing could drive out. "You call that exaggeration? Our contractor is staging materials across my access road, temporarily." Everything with Diane was temporary. Temporary lights, temporary surveys, temporary inconvenience. Yet every temporary decision somehow moved the subdivision farther onto my land. I started recording again. Every sentence, every machine, every license plate. One bulldozer operator noticed my phone and immediately shut off his engine. Another looked toward Diane before climbing out of his cab. He wasn't waiting for instructions from the foreman. He was waiting for permission from her. That told me exactly who was directing the operation. Half an hour later, another patrol vehicle rolled up the gravel road. Deputy Eli Harper stepped out carrying a notebook. He looked tired. "Nathan, you came back. I received another complaint." I almost laughed. I'm guessing it wasn't mine. He glanced toward the machinery. "No." Diane walked over before either of us said another word. "Deputy." She smiled as though they had another appointment. "I brought additional documentation." Harper accepted another stack of neatly printed maps. This time she included what appeared to be county work permits bearing official-looking signatures. He studied them carefully, then looked at the trench. "Then, at my deed, I've reviewed the recorder's office files," I said calmly. "No revised survey has ever been filed." Diane answered before Harper could. "Construction approvals don't always require immediate recording. Boundary changes do, they're being processed." I watched Harper's face. He wasn't convinced. But he wasn't ready to accuse anyone of fraud either. He walked the edge of the trench himself, measured the distance to my driveway, examined the cast iron property monument I'd photographed weeks earlier. Finally, he looked at the blocked entrance. If emergency services needed access, they'd have a problem, I finished. He nodded slowly. That was the first crack. Small, but real. Harper turned toward Diane. "Can this truck be moved? It's supporting active construction. It blocks the only entrance. Our engineers determined this was necessary." "For how long?" She hesitated. "Only until Phase 1 is complete." There it was again. Phase 1. The same phrase I'd seen inside the confidential planning memo. She didn't realize she'd just confirmed it. Harper scribbled something into his notebook. When he closed it, his tone had changed. "I'm documenting the obstruction." Diane's smile faded for just a second. "Deputy, this is still a civil matter." "Maybe." He looked at the trench again. But if access to occupied property is intentionally restricted, that's something the county will need to review. She opened her mouth to argue. Instead, she stopped. For the first time since this started, Diane Prescott looked uncertain. Harper climbed back into his cruiser without making promises. He couldn't shut down the work, not yet, but he also hadn't accepted Diane's explanation. As he drove away, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. He didn't head back toward town. He turned instead toward the county engineering office. Interesting. Very interesting. The bulldozers started again. Steel tracks rolled forward. Another section of earth collapsed beneath the blade. Dust drifted across my pasture. I stood there recording every second. Because if Diane believed forged permits would protect her, she was about to discover what real evidence looked like. The problem was, evidence doesn't stop a bulldozer in the moment. By the next morning, the trench hadn't grown longer. Instead, the pressure became quieter, smarter. A concrete barrier now sat across the entrance to my driveway beside the dump truck. Someone had bolted a temporary construction sign onto it. Road closed. Authorized personnel. Only. Authorized by who? Certainly not me. Around noon, my feed supplier called. Nathan, our driver, couldn't get in, I figured. He said construction crews turned him around. I never authorized that. They told him the ranch was inside an active work zone. I thanked him, hung up, and wrote down the time. Another piece of evidence. By evening, the propane company left a voicemail. Same story. No access. The following morning, the mail carrier parked at the county road and walked the last quarter mile carrying only a handful of envelopes. I couldn't get the truck through. You shouldn't have to. He looked back toward the machinery. They told me this road belongs to Cedar Ridge now. I smiled without humor. It doesn't. I figured. He handed me my mail. I thought you'd want to hear exactly what they said. I added another note to my growing log. False claims. Interference with access. Witness. 3 separate businesses. Diane wasn't just isolating me physically anymore. She was creating the appearance that my ranch had already become part of her subdivision. That afternoon, Banjo refused to leave the old well house. He paced tight circles around the concrete pad, nose pressed to the ground. When I walked over, fresh tire tracks crossed the grass. No heavy equipment belonged there. I crouched beside the pressure tank. Someone had opened the electrical panel. Nothing had been damaged. Nothing had been stolen. The cover had simply been removed, then loosely fastened again. A warning. Someone wanted me to know they could reach anything on my ranch. I photographed every bolt before replacing the cover. Just after sunset, an old blue pickup rolled slowly through the open gate. I recognized it immediately. Martha Green. She owned the neighboring ranch to my north. She climbed out carrying a weathered cardboard tube almost as old as her truck. I've been meaning to bring this over. She spread several yellowed survey sheets across my kitchen table. Original county plats, hand-drawn, signed in ink, dated 43 years earlier. She tapped one corner with her finger. Your father helped set these monuments. I leaned closer. There it was. The same cast-iron boundary marker I'd been photographing, recorded on the original county survey. Its coordinates matched my deed exactly. It never moved, I said quietly. No. She looked me straight in the eye. But someone wants folks to believe it did. Then she pulled out 3 faded photographs. Each showed neighboring ranchers standing beside that same monument during various fence repairs over the years. One included my father. The date stamp was 29 years old. You keep everything. She smiled. Out here, paper remembers better than people. I scanned every document before she left. Original plats, historic photographs, witness statements. The pile of evidence was growing faster than Diane probably imagined. Still, the ranch felt smaller every day. Neighbors stopped driving by. Construction crews watched every movement. Floodlights lit my pasture every evening. Even Banjo had stopped sleeping through the night. The isolation wasn't just physical anymore. It was psychological. Exactly as the planning memo had described. Late that night, while reviewing the newest camera footage, another notification appeared. Unknown sender. One attachment. No message. I opened it carefully. It was a photograph taken inside what looked like Cedar Ridge's construction office. Pinned to a planning board was a large project schedule. Across the top, written in bold red marker, were 2 words. Phase 1. Someone had circled tomorrow's date. Below it, another handwritten note caught my eye. Complete access closure before inspection. No signature. No explanation. Just a deadline. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Tomorrow. Whatever Diane had planned, she intended to finish trapping the ranch before anyone outside Cedar Ridge had the chance to stop her. At sunrise, the machinery was already moving. A second excavator cut across the eastern side of the trench while crews lowered concrete drainage pipe directly beside my driveway. The opening was shrinking by the minute. Then I noticed something different. A white county engineering truck rolled up behind the construction equipment. Deputy Eli Harper stepped out beside it. So did a woman carrying a hard hat and a laser measuring rod. Her badge read, County Engineering, Senior Inspector Rebecca Owens. Diane walked toward them with complete confidence. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "We're making excellent progress." Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she looked straight at the trench. "Who's responsible for this excavation?" "Our contractor." "Permit number?" Diane handed over the same laminated packet she'd been carrying all week. Rebecca flipped through it for less than 30 seconds. Then she frowned. "Where's the excavation authorization?" "It's included." "No." She turned another page. "This is a grading application." Another page. "This is a subdivision map." Another. "This is an environmental review." She closed the folder. "I asked for the excavation permit." Silence. For the first time, Diane didn't have an immediate response. I walked over carrying my own binder. "I have something you should probably see." Rebecca accepted it. Inside were copies of my deed, the original county plat Martha had provided, dated photographs of the boundary monument, GPS logs, hidden camera stills, witness notes from delivery drivers, and screenshots from the anonymous planning documents. She spent nearly 10 minutes reading. Harper stood beside her without saying a word. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Cole, when did this trench begin?" "Yesterday morning." She measured the distance from the trench to my recorded property line, then measured again, then compared it with my survey. Her expression hardened. "This excavation crosses the recorded boundary." Diane immediately stepped forward. "Our revised survey," Rebecca interrupted her. I checked the recorder's office before driving out. Another silence. "There is no revised survey." Diane's confidence cracked. "It hasn't been uploaded yet." Rebecca shook her head. "It hasn't been approved." That landed harder than anything I'd heard all week. Construction crews stopped pretending not to listen. Several operators climbed down from their machines. Rebecca walked directly to the cast iron monument. She brushed dirt away with her boot until the original county stamp became visible. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. One contractor quietly answered. "The property marker. The legal property marker." She looked directly at Diane. "Moving this monument is a criminal offense." No one spoke. Then Harper reached into his notebook. When Mr. Cole reported concerns earlier this week, you stated the boundary had already been revised. Diane folded her arms. That's what I was told. By whom? No answer. Rebecca turned toward the excavator nearest the driveway. Shut it down. The operator looked at Diane. Rebecca repeated herself. I said shut it down. The engine went silent. One by one, the remaining machines powered off. For the first time since the trench appeared, there was complete silence across my ranch. Rebecca wasn't finished. She walked toward the dump truck blocking my entrance. Who authorized this? Our site manager. Move it. It's supporting active. Move it. The driver didn't even look at Diane this time. He climbed inside the cab and backed away from my driveway. Fresh daylight opened the only entrance to my ranch. It wasn't fully repaired, but it was open. Harper photographed everything. The trench, the barrier, the machinery, the property monument, even the construction signs claiming the road belonged to Cedar Ridge. When he finished, he looked at me. I think Sheriff Boone needs to see this himself. Diane's head snapped toward him. That's unnecessary. Harper closed his notebook. That isn't your decision. As the county vehicles prepared to leave, my phone vibrated. Unknown number, one new message. I have the original emails proving Diane ordered the boundary moved. Meet me tonight. Come alone. Lucas. I read it twice, then locked my phone. The trench had finally stopped growing, but the real case was only beginning. Lucas's message included a location just outside Cedar Ridge, a closed feed store that had been empty for years. I arrived 10 minutes early. My truck stayed on the county road. I left the headlights off. At exactly 8:30, Lucas pulled into the gravel lot in the same white pickup I'd seen during the surveys. He stepped out carrying a weatherproof document case. His first words weren't an apology. They're watching both of us, I figured. He glanced toward the highway before handing me the case. I copied everything before they locked me out. Inside was a company laptop, printed emails, meeting minutes, and a portable hard drive. Lucas took a slow breath. I was hired to verify survey monuments. So why didn't you speak up? I did. He pulled out a printed email. My supervisor told me to stop asking questions. The email was dated 3 months earlier. Lucas had written, Original county monument conflicts with proposed subdivision boundary. Recommend legal review before construction. The reply came from Mark Collins less than 20 minutes later. No further review required. Continue using Phase 1 alignment. Another email followed. This one came from Diane Prescott herself. The original monument creates unnecessary acquisition delays. Proceed with revised field markers as discussed. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not sloppy paperwork. A written instruction to ignore the legal boundary. Lucas kept pulling documents from the case. Meeting notes, construction schedules, invoices for replacement survey monuments. Then he handed me the document that mattered most. It was titled Phase 1 Acquisition Strategy. Unlike the version I'd received anonymously, this copy included signatures. Mark Collins, Diane Prescott, 2 HOA board members. At the bottom sat one sentence highlighted in yellow. Temporary access restrictions are expected to encourage voluntary sale negotiations. I looked up. They admitted it. Lucas nodded. They never expected anyone outside the board to read it. What changed? They decided to replace me after I questioned the permits. He gave a tired smile. So I made copies. Before either of us could say another word, headlights swept across the parking lot. Lucas stiffened. That's them. A black SUV rolled slowly toward us, then stopped. It didn't park. It watched. The driver never stepped out. After nearly 30 seconds, it pulled away without a word. Lucas waited until the taillights disappeared. They know someone leaked information. I closed the document case. Then we're done meeting here. The next stop wasn't my ranch. It was the sheriff's office. Sheriff Walter Boone was still inside despite the late hour. Deputy Harper stood beside his desk reviewing photographs from the trench inspection. Neither man interrupted as I spread the evidence across the conference table. Original deed, historic plats, hidden camera footage, engineering inspection notes, emails, signed acquisition strategy. Rebecca Owens arrived 20 minutes later after Harper called her. She examined the emails one by one, then compared the signatures to the permits Diane had presented earlier that day. They don't match. Sheriff Boone looked up. What do you mean? The permits shown on site list approvals that don't exist. She pointed to one signature. This engineer retired 2 years ago. Another. This department never issued this authorization. A third. The permit number belongs to an unrelated drainage project 15 miles away. The room fell silent. Harper finally spoke. So we're no longer dealing with a civil property dispute. Boone nodded once. No. He closed the folder carefully. Now we're looking at possible document fraud, criminal tampering with survey monuments, and intentional obstruction of property access. Lucas swallowed hard. I'll testify. Boone looked directly at him. Are you prepared to sign a statement? Tonight. Without hesitation, Lucas sat down and began writing. Every meeting, every instruction, every email, every conversation he could remember. When he finished, he signed each page. Boone signed as witness. Harper collected the originals into evidence bags. Rebecca gathered the forged permits. Then the sheriff reached for his phone. Get me the county attorney. Harper nodded. And notify Judge Ellis that we'll likely need an emergency property preservation order first thing in the morning. Boone turned toward me. Mr. Cole, it was the first time he'd used my name instead of Nathan. I think your ranch just stopped being their construction site. He paused before adding one final sentence. And tomorrow, the Cedar Ridge Board is going to have some very difficult questions to answer. By 8 the next morning, the county courthouse parking lot was already full. I wasn't there to sue anyone. Not yet. Sheriff Boone had requested an emergency hearing to preserve the property while investigators reviewed the evidence. Diane arrived with 2 attorneys and 3 HOA board members. She walked into the courtroom with the same confidence she'd worn at my fence. It disappeared the moment Judge Ellis entered. This hearing concerns a request for immediate injunctive relief, the judge began. I am not deciding ownership today. I am deciding whether ongoing work should continue. County Attorney Melissa Grant stood first. She submitted my recorded deed, the original county plats, Inspector Rebecca Owens's field report, Deputy Harper's photographs, and Lucas Bennett's sworn statement. Then she played 30 seconds of the trail camera footage. The courtroom watched in silence as 2 men dug up the original property monument and replaced it with another marker. Judge Ellis paused the video. Has this footage been authenticated? It has, Grant replied. Timestamps, metadata, and witness verification are included. Diane's attorney stood. Your Honor, this footage doesn't prove intent. Grant answered immediately. No, the emails do. She handed copies to the bailiff. Within moments, the judge was reading Diane's own instruction. Proceed with revised field markers as discussed. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Diane leaned toward her attorney. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely worried. Inspector Owens testified next. I searched county records personally. Were any revised boundaries approved? No. Were excavation permits issued for work across Mr. Cole's property? No. Were documents presented on site accurate? They were not. Then Deputy Harper testified. He described the blocked driveway, delivery trucks turned away, and the obstruction of the only practical entrance to my ranch. Finally, Lucas took the stand. His voice shook during the first few questions. It didn't by the last. He described being instructed to ignore the original monument. He identified the emails. He confirmed the planning meetings. Then he looked directly toward Diane. I told them the survey was wrong. The courtroom remained silent. I was told the ranch would come around once access became difficult. No one interrupted him. Judge Ellis folded his hands. He looked toward Diane's attorney. Do you dispute that statement? We dispute its interpretation. Do you dispute the email? The attorney hesitated. No. That single answer changed everything. Judge Ellis spoke carefully. Based on the evidence presented today, the court finds probable cause that unauthorized work may have occurred beyond the recorded property boundary. He signed the order in front of everyone. Effective immediately, all excavation, grading, construction, and access restrictions affecting Mr. Cole's property are suspended pending further proceedings. The bailiff handed certified copies to Sheriff Boone. Before the ink had dried, Boone walked outside with Deputy Harper. Construction crews were already waiting at the trench. Boone handed the foreman the order. Every machine stops now. Within minutes, engines shut down across the western boundary. The same bulldozers that had surrounded my ranch fell completely silent. Workers loaded equipment without arguing. Concrete barriers disappeared. The dump truck moved. Temporary signs came down. For the first time in days, I drove my pickup through my own entrance without asking anyone's permission. As I reached the mailbox, another county vehicle arrived. Rebecca Owens stepped out carrying orange paint. She walked to the original cast iron monument. Then she sprayed a bright protective circle around it. No one touches this marker, she said. Not until this case is over. Sheriff Boone nodded. I'll have deputies checking it every day. Diane stood across the road watching everything. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply watched as every advantage she'd built over 4 years disappeared in less than one afternoon. I thought it was over. It wasn't. Because stopping the trench only ended their plan. The investigation into how they created it was about to bring down the entire Cedar Ridge board. Over the next 6 weeks, county investigators collected everything. Every forged permit, every altered survey, every email, every hidden camera recording, every witness statement. They even recovered the original cast iron property monument after Mark Collins agreed to show investigators where it had been hidden. His attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement, and in exchange for truthful testimony, he admitted exactly how the plans had unfolded. It hadn't started with construction. It had started in a board meeting 4 years earlier. Diane had insisted that my ranch was the missing piece that would raise every home's value. When I refused to sell, the strategy changed. Increase pressure, control access, create confusion over the boundary, hope the owner gives up. Instead, they documented their own conspiracy. The county attorney filed multiple civil enforcement actions, while the district attorney opened a criminal investigation into the forged public documents and the removal of the survey monument. Several board members resigned before the first formal hearing. Others tried blaming outside contractors. The emails made that impossible. Every major decision traced back to the same signatures. Diane Prescott's name appeared again and again. A month later, I returned to the courthouse. This time, it wasn't an emergency hearing. It was the final civil proceeding over my property. Judge Ellis reviewed the complete record. He confirmed my deed had never changed. He confirmed the original monument controlled the boundary. He confirmed the excavation and access restrictions had crossed onto my land without legal authority. Then he entered the final order. Cedar Ridge Estates was permanently prohibited from entering or performing work on my property without my written permission or a lawful court order. The HOA was directed to restore the damaged areas along the trench under county supervision. They were also ordered to reimburse my documented costs, including survey expenses, legal fees, and property restoration. The amount mattered. The ruling mattered more. The court record made one thing unmistakably clear. I had never been the problem. After the hearing, Sheriff Boone walked with me outside. "You kept every receipt," he said with a grin, "and every photo." I figured someone should. He laughed. "Most people argue. You documented." Inspector Rebecca Owens joined us carrying a final survey map. The restored boundary matched the original survey completed decades earlier, exactly as my father had left it. Lucas Bennett eventually accepted a position with another surveying firm. Before he left town, he stopped by the ranch one last time. "I almost stayed quiet," he admitted. "I know. I'm glad I didn't." "So am I." We shook hands beside the same cast-iron monument that had nearly disappeared forever. Martha Green drove over a few days later with homemade pie balanced on the passenger seat. She looked across the repaired pasture and smiled. "Your father would have liked this." "I think so. He always said the truth takes longer than a lie." She nodded toward the fresh grass growing where the trench had been. "But it lasts longer." By autumn, the floodlights facing my ranch were gone. The fake construction signs had disappeared. The heavy equipment had moved on. Cattle once again crossed the western pasture without climbing around piles of dirt. Banjo stretched beneath the old cottonwood tree as though nothing had ever happened. Some evenings I still walked to the property monument, not because I worried someone would move it again, because it reminded me how close I had come to losing something no amount of money could replace. People often ask whether fighting the HOA was worth it. I always give the same answer. This ranch belonged to my family long before Cedar Ridge existed. It wasn't saved by anger. It wasn't saved by threats. It was saved by deeds, records, witnesses, and the simple decision to document the truth before someone else could rewrite it. The trench eventually filled with new soil. Grass covered every scar. From a distance, no one would ever know it had been there. But I remembered. And every time I drove through the same gate they tried to erase, I smiled. Because my ranch was still exactly where it had always been. The HOA's plan wasn't.
If this story taught me anything, it's that a stronger defense isn't the loudest voice. It's a tool you can prove. I didn't sell my ranch by arguing harder or losing my temper. I sold it by keeping records, respecting the law, listening to people who choose to do the right thing, and refusing to give up when the pressure kept building. Something standing your ground doesn't mean making the biggest noise. Sometimes it simply means taking the next honest step, even when nobody else believes it will matter. In the end, those small choices became the foundation that protected everything my family had worked for. That's something worth remembering, whether it's a brand, a family home, or anything you spend years building. Lands can carry memories, hard work, and generations of sacrifice. Protecting it with patience, integrity, and persistence is never wasting effort. Now, I'm really glad to hear from you. If you believe you stand your ground the way I did, type yes in the comments. Or if you ever had a difficult experience with an HOA, a property dispute, or a neighbor, share your story below. I read as many comments as I can, and hearing your experience reminds all of us that we're not facing these challenges alone. And if you enjoy stories about ordinary people standing firm with quiet courage, respect for the law, and a little determination, I'd be honored to help you surprise and join me for the next story. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and thanks for spending your time with me today.